The ant's voice cannot tell the truth. The ant's voice is a loud and nasty bully, all gruff, bluff, and no power. The ant's voice is only there to scare me. I won't let that happen anymore. The ant's voice exaggerates everything that is negative. It lies to me. My ant's voice has no real power over me unless I decide to believe it. My ant's voice constantly lies, and liars are loud and like to be heard. My ant's voice hates it when I ignore it and say, "So what? Who cares?" Those ants' thoughts couldn't tell the truth even if they tried. That is the end of the ant's handout. Notice that it is directed at your automatic negative thoughts, those thoughts we want to become more aware of, so that we can get rid of them and exchange them for more realistic, rational thoughts. If you read the ant's handout every day to yourself in slow talk, you will begin to notice changes. The ant's narrative is typically one of the most powerful methods we have of learning to automatically reject negative thinking. At present, what we are doing is becoming more aware of our automatic negative thinking and learning to deal with it realistically and appropriately. We have some new strategies coming up that will begin to change our automatic negative thinking habits into thinking that is much more realistic and rational. For example, for many years our feelings concerning ourselves have been skewed and inaccurate. We are going to work on changing these inaccurate feelings too. For over a dozen years my own thinking patterns were almost entirely negative. I didn't know it or realize it at the time, but social anxiety held me tightly in its grip. I was isolated, I lived alone, I had no friends, and I had no one with whom I could discuss my problems. So my view of the world was pretty bleak. I saw everything around me as being negative, and no matter what it was, I could cast a negative light on it. To me, everything seemed dark. Every silver lining had a cloud. If someone said something to me that could be misinterpreted, I usually blew it out of proportion and turned it into something negative to be used against me, and then I would beat myself up about it more and more. Of course, the more negatively I thought, the more socially anxious I became. As time went by, because of my negative thoughts and feelings, I began to expect to fail socially. It wasn't just thinking anymore. I was expecting. I began to expect not to do well when I met people. I began to expect people wouldn't like me. I began to expect that I wouldn't be able to speak well to a stranger. I began to expect that I would make a fool of myself in public. I was sure that people thought I was strange anyway. I just expected everything to stay as I thought it was, hopeless and bleak. And the more I expected it, the more my life worked out in that direction. Now, I never chose to be that way. I never decided to be socially anxious or a negative thinker. Those thoughts were drilled into me many years ago by other people, but they were so strong and so emotionally powerful that the repetition of those criticisms and the daily reinforcement of negativity that was directed at me sunk down deeply into my mind and colored my entire view of the world. Those negative thoughts that had originally come from other people now became my own thoughts, because I had heard them over and over again so many times before. I can't remember a day when I wasn't criticized as an adolescent. There was no escaping the screaming, the tirades, and the confrontations. I was miserable at the time, and I stayed as far away from the confrontations as I could, but the words that were directed at me stuck. They drove deeply into my brain, and eventually I believed them. I can look back now and see they were lies. But when I was going through it, I didn't realize this at all. I thought those negative, hopeless, damning thoughts were my own. I thought there was no hope for me, that I was completely helpless, and nothing good would ever come my way. After all, I had had this message repeated to me hundreds and hundreds of times throughout my life. I was no good. I would never amount to anything. My ideas and opinions were stupid. I was a dummy. I heard this message literally thousands and thousands of times as I grew up. So it must be true, right? Today, I can tell you it wasn't true. Of course it was a lie. But I didn't fully understand this at the time because the barrage of criticism never stopped. It was constant, and my brain was filled with this never-ending stream of negativity. There was no one at the time to help me see that what was being said to me was not rational and realistic. I had no choice at that time, when I was a child, but to listen, and listen to a loud, critical, negative voice that told me every day of my life that I was no good and that I would never be any good. I was always wrong, and furthermore, I wasn't even entitled to my own opinion. This is part of my story. What I want to point out to you now, however, is that you are not the one who filled your mind with negative thoughts, criticisms, blame, and guilt. These thoughts were planted by someone else, by other people. And to make it worse, even though other people caused you to develop social anxiety, it is you who has to deal with it now. This is just a fact. It is an unfortunate fact, but we have to begin where we are and move forward. We cannot be looking back and placing blame, even if it's well-deserved, because placing blame on other people is not a solution. It is not going to make us any better. It is not going to help us overcome social anxiety. It is true that it does no good to play the blame game. That just holds back our progress. We do have to learn to deal with the situation, which you have already started to do by using this ant's narrative. So please, be good to yourself and read it every day. Let the ant's message sink in. Let it convince you of the truth in this matter. And let it help you stop believing those automatic negative thoughts, which are nothing but pathological lies. You and I believed those lies for too many years. It's time we started opening our mind to the truth. Let me illustrate this another way. Those negative thoughts of mine didn't originate with me. I wasn't born thinking bad thoughts about myself. I remember some happy childhood days before I became the whipping boy of a major authority figure in my life. But the years of criticism and emotional upset took their toll on me, and the words that were thrown at me by others eventually took root and became my own thoughts. Not because I chose this to happen, but because I heard them so many times. They were repeated and repeated and repeated, and they finally sunk deeply into my brain. It took almost 20 years for me to realize what this automatic negative thinking was doing to my life, how it had tried to destroy me, and how it wanted another 20 years to finish the work it had started. When I fully realized this, I began the process of seeing things more rationally and realistically, and most of the situations I had felt negatively about disappeared, one by one, as time went by. Nothing happens overnight. Your brain cannot adequately process new information this quickly. But the more you catch your old automatic negative thoughts, deliberately reject them, and refuse to dwell on them by making a rational statement and using distractions, the more you are moving away from social anxiety and toward a healthier future. Always keep this in mind as you read the Ant's Handout. And please read it every day. The consistency and persistence involved in this exercise is quite powerful and adds up very nicely as the days turn into weeks. You can be a changed person within the space of a few months. You won't fully overcome social anxiety in the space of a few months, but you can make significant progress against it, and you will be able to see and feel some very positive differences. Just keep up your therapy. Stick with it every day, and don't let the lying ant's thinking pull you down.